Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I will explain you the list of ports available in the Kubernetes services, and also I will go and talk in detail about services architecture. So there are a couple of ways where you can access your Kubernetes pods outside your Kubernetes cluster. So here you can imagine I'm having the Kubernetes cluster with single node where my Nginx pods running with the listener port 80. If you wanted to access this pod outside the Kubernetes cluster with the IP, something you can try to hit the URL with the listener port 80. When you do this, you will get the connection refused. If you still wanted to access your pod outside your Kubernetes cluster, there is a way by using host network equal to true in your manifest file. When you do that, you will instead of using the pod IP, you can access this pod using the host IP :80. So that way you can access your pod outside your Kubernetes cluster. However, there are a couple of disadvantages in using host network. Since you are using the node, this node might have the limited number of ports and you might go shortage of ports. At the same time, since if you have more application, you need to remember which application holds which port. So in a way that it will be a very tedious to maintain and manage it. So there is a second option where you can also access your Kubernetes pods outside your Kubernetes cluster using host port. The host port is exactly the same like a host network. Instead of host network, you need to use host port in your manifest file where you can declare host port equal to 8080. If you declare 8080, that means instead of accessing your application with the listener port 80, you can access your application outside your pod with :8080. That is the advantage of using host port. But still, the disadvantages of what we have it in a host network, that same disadvantages even this host port also has. Let me explain you the services architecture in detail. This is my Kubernetes cluster where my Nginx app running with the two pods too. In order for me to access these pods outside my Kubernetes cluster, I can use services as one of the options. If you look at here, I have Nginx app in my services, and also I have Nginx app in the pods. That means your selector in Nginx selector in services and the labels in pod should match. Only then your services can discover the matching pod. Once that matching is performed, services will help you to perform the load balancing, and also it will help you to reroute the traffic. Okay, let us assume that someone, if they wanted to access these services through this IP, through this URL. So you might wonder, what is this 30,001? So within the Kubernetes cluster, there is a concept called node port. The node port has a specific set of range from 30,000 to 32,768. You can use any one port in your services.yaml. So in my case, I'm using 30,001. That means I'm ready to receive any request for the port 30,001. That's why when the user sends this request, node port will receive that request. Once the node port receives that request, it will redirect that request to kubeproxy. Kubeproxy will determine which services is waiting to receive the request 30,001. In this case, Nginx app is a one which is waiting for 30,001. So now Nginx app will receive the request from the external cluster. So next step for services is to redirect that request to the respective pod. So there is something called cluster IP. Cluster IP is not going to play any role in this section because node port is going to take care of accessing the external cluster, and the job for cluster IP is just to perform the communication within the Kubernetes cluster. If I do have a different pod inside the Kubernetes cluster, then if you wanted to talk between the pods or between the services, then you can use the cluster IP. Cluster IP will get created whenever you create your services.yaml. Okay, there is another one called port. Okay, this is a port. Here in my example I use 1990. This port is responsible for forwarding your request to the respective pod through the target port. So this target port, this is the target port is nothing but where your Nginx app is listening for. So since as I mentioned before, the default Nginx app listener port is 80, that is going to be a target port where your Nginx app can receive any request that is coming to :80. Okay, I hope you understand this services architecture. So I'm going to follow what is there in the document. So if you look at my host network, I have highlighted this particular line is responsible of accessing your pod outside your Kubernetes cluster. Let me copy the entire YAML file. Going back to my terminal, host network.yaml. So just to show the difference, I'm going to comment this particular line. Okay, pod is running. I'm going back. In order for me to access, I'm going to open another browser to access this pod. 192:80. 80 is the listener port of my Nginx app. If we go on it will wait for some time and it will throw an error saying connection refused, which is expected. So going back to my terminal, I'm going to uncomment that particular line. Okay, so if you go on access now, it should work. You see here, this Nginx pod running in Kubernetes cluster. Okay, let me go and delete this. Sorry, instead of deleting and creating it. Okay, fine. Now I'm going back to my document. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this for host port. Okay, so let me copy this. So if you look at here, the host port, so that's a difference. Here you will run with the listener port, whatever that Nginx app running. In the host port, you can declare the port, which port you wanted to run. So here I'm declaring host port :8080. That means I'm going to change my URL to 8080 to access the same Nginx app. Let me copy this entire YAML file. Going back to my manifest file. Okay. Okay. Now going back, I need to access this one with 8080. See, it's working fine. So now we have completed both the demo for host port and also the host network. Now we have to try executing the services demo. So if you look at here, this is what I was trying to explain in the presentation. So selected Nginx app in the services.yaml. In the pods, I have the label as app Nginx app. This is how you will your services will identify the pods with the matching label. Once it finds, it will do the load balancing and redirecting the request based on the number of pods that is running in the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, let me copy this. So if you look at here, I'm defining this port as node port. That is why you can access this one outside your Kubernetes cluster. I'm defining the port forwarding as 1990 and target port as 80 and node port as 30,001. That is why you can access this pod using 30,001. Let me go and save it. Before that, let me check if there are any other services are running. Okay, I don't have anything. Let me copy the pod file also. Okay, so service is created. Get svc. If you see here, for this particular service which I created, you can see the port 1990 and the node port as 30,001. Okay, now I need to create the pods. This is a pod which I copied from a blog. I'm going to execute this. Okay, so now I have created the service, I have created the pod. Now I need to access this one with the port 30,001. Okay, so you see that it is working. So I think that is all about services, and we have 3 different concepts we have gone through this video. If you like this video, please like it and subscribe it. Thank you.